Our next guest is public enemy #1 with the White House right now, as he heads up the House Intelligence Committee investigation into Russian meddling in the U.S. election. Please welcome Congressman Adam Schiff.
Congressman, I'll start. So your committee spoke to Hope Hicks yesterday, I believe, was it, or the day before?
Day before.
And then the next day, she resigned from the White House, saying that she also said she had said these little white lies. Number one, can that lead to little white perjury? That's my first question. And the second is the White House says that the timing had nothing to do with anything, that it was just she decided the next day. Do you buy that?
I don't know what was involved in the timing. And, you know, in fairness to Hope Hicks, I wish the conversations of the committee had never left the committee. The question that was asked of her, though, was certainly a pertinent question. If a witness is willing to say things that aren't true on behalf of the boss outside the committee, we need to know, because it reflects whether they'll be truthful in the committee. But the most significant issue I had with her testimony are the whole areas that she refused to testify on the instructions of the White House. Now, that's not her fault. That's the instructions of her employer. And
she could do that. Well,
she can't unless we let her do that. And this is the issue. Will the Congress assert itself? Will the Congress insist on answers? When Steve Bannon refused to answer questions along the same lines, the Republicans said, well, we need to demand answers. That's an outrage. And they subpoenaed him on the spot.
I see.
Now, Steve Bannon apparently is a man without a country. Not beloved in the White House, no longer with Breitbart.
Right.
So my colleagues in the GOP were willing to stand up and assert the institutional responsibilities of the committee. Not so with Corey Lewandowski, not so with Hope Hicks, not so with any number of witnesses who have similarly refused to answer questions. They need to be subpoenaed. They need to be compelled. And
by Robert Mueller.
Well, by us, as well as Mueller, but by us. And if there is a legitimate claim as to a small subset of questions that deal with executive privilege, then we should negotiate and respect that. But you can't say we're simply not going to answer questions about anything that happened during the transition, anything that happened during the administration, whether it involved the president or it didn't. And we have obviously very important questions to ask Hope Hicks about the preparation of that false statement about the meeting at Trump Tower with the Russians.
With John Jr.
Exactly.
I'd like to go a little different direction, if you don't mind, because you are, at the Intelligence Committee, probably the institution that has best access to what actually happened with the Russians. And my view is, if the Russians did it to us the first time, shame on them. If they do it to us again, shame on us. So what are we doing? What are we doing? Quite apart from the investigation of the White House or the transition or any of that, how's the committee pursuing the issue of what the Russians actually did and how we actually stop it? Because I can imagine that Vladimir Putin is ready to go again, and we shouldn't let him do that.
I think that's exactly right, and indeed all of our intelligence chiefs have said as much, that they expect the Russians will be back. Indeed, the Russians have never left. In terms of what's being done about it, I have to say not nearly enough. The states are certainly taking action. They're hardening their elections infrastructure to make sure the Russians can't penetrate it again, can't monkey around with the vote counts. But what we need, because you know how formidable the Russians are as an adversary, is a whole-of-government response, where every cabinet secretary is working within their portfolio to establish a deterrent for the Russians. There are still bipartisan sanctions sitting on the president's desk that he refuses to implement. We need to send a clear message to Russia that any further meddling won't be tolerated. They'll pay a heavy price for it.
What kind of heavy price?
Well, the price that the Russians care most about is a price to their economy. That's why the top priority for the Russians are doing away with sanctions over their invasion of Ukraine, doing away with sanctions over their meddling in our election, because what Putin really fears more than anything else is not losing an election. If you're a viable opponent of the Kremlin, you end up in jail or dead. What he does fear, though, is the power of people to gather in massive numbers and throw out their autocratic government. And to the degree the Russian economy suffers and people take to the streets, that's the threat that he fears.
Do you think we fully know what happened, though? Are you confident that we really understand how the Russians did what they did?
We know an awful lot about how they did what they did in terms of their hacking operation, the dumping of documents, in terms of their use of social media and their use of paid media like RT and Sputnik. We don't know as much as we should about whether they also used financial entanglement, which they have used in Europe and elsewhere to exert influence, and that's the money laundering issue. We obviously don't know the full role of the Trump campaign, although we know a lot more than that than when we started. We know enough, though, to take firm steps to respond to them and to harden our defenses. We know enough to know they'll be back.
So let me ask you this, because I find it insane that you co-chair the Intel Committee, Devin Nunes is your co-chair, and that you're supposed to be working together, and you have two different sides. It's become more about the politics rather than the job, which is to do the intel that answers these questions. And I want to know, because if this is so partisan, how are we supposed to understand, as just a regular person going down the street, how are we supposed to know who to believe?
Yeah, competing memos.
Well, I mean,
this is a really central problem and challenge.
Yeah.
When we had our first open hearing in March of last year, I said at that time that the best service we could offer the public is if we could do a thorough investigation, arrive at a common conclusion, and not force the public to choose between a GOP version and a Democratic version. That was the goal. Now, I have been told since that hearing, because at that hearing James Comey revealed for the first time that he had opened an investigation the previous July into the Trump campaign's connections with the Russians, that my colleagues in the GOP felt that hearing was an unmitigated disaster for them. It was the very next day that the chairman went on that midnight run to get documents that he said showed malfeasance of the Obama administration. And the following day, he went back and presented those, and we would learn that the documents he obtained actually had gotten from the White House, and it was concocted with the White House. That's the point at which the committee investigation really diverged. And this memo business, we asked the chairman, was this similarly done in conjunction with the White House? And he wouldn't answer the question. And it's very hard, obviously, to do an objective investigation if the chair views mission differently as protecting the president. And I view our mission as protecting the public and letting the chips fall wherever they may. And I would, frankly, be thrilled, have been thrilled, if we could have seen this investigation through on a bipartisan basis and reached whatever conclusion we reached, whether it was exoneration or incrimination, if we had done it together.
Let me just say, but I've spent a lot of time in Washington, and I know you've got a really hard job, and I appreciate what you're doing for the country, but I really hope you can wrap it up. The country needs to get back to business, so that's my greatest hope, is that this gets done, and this gets done. And by the way, I just want to say on Robert Mueller, this is somebody I know. I worked with him. He was FBI director when I was National Security Advisor. I have enormous respect for him, and he is going to do this in a very fair way. And so I just hope we can get it done.
So here's what we know. Here's what we know thus far. Congressman Adam Schiff is sticking around.
Okay, good.
We'll be right back.